Agnieszka Płonka is a young liberty activist from Poland. This is Fountainhead Forum 2. I recently met her at a panel in Tbilisi, Georgia, where we discussed the war. Today we're going to discuss Poland, liberty in Poland, and of course the overall direction of liberty in Poland, as well as Polish history. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here too. You seem like you're very knowledgeable. Uh, First thing I wanted to ask you is, where did your libertarian journey start?
So I have to say that I really dived into libertarianism and started going to libertarian conferences after I left Poland for a few years in my early 20s and then in my late 20s, because I'm from Krakow. It's this big city south of Poland with the royal castle, quite famous for tourists. And my parents were in the anti-communist movement in the 80s. I was born right after the Berlin Wall has fallen, basically. And they always had this intuition of fighting for liberty, even if it wasn't as pronounced as it is in the libertarian movement. And when I went to visit my grandpa, I would hear stories about his grand uncle it was his uncle, my great grand uncle, that was murdered by the Soviets in the Katyn massacres. So it was the the murder of about 20,000 Polish officers that was ordered directly by Stalin in 1940. And it was done for the reason that they did not want to have an educated class of people in Poland when they planned to rule over Poland after World War II. And all the people with higher education in the mid-war period would become officers in an event of war, which is what happened to all the Polish intelligentsia. So it was a very smart, should I say, move to eradicate the educated class by just murdering prisoners of war, which happened 80 years ago, even before Hitler attacked the Soviet Union. And during the communist period, you were not supposed to mention it, or you could go to jail. And they were lying about it, claiming it was Germany, up until 1991, when after the fall of the Soviet Union, they actually told everyone what happened. But now they are trying to whitewash it again. So that was my grandfather's story. And he was very affected by it personally. And as he was probably the most important male figure in my life, I also took it seriously because I could see it. It affected my family. And when I was staying in Poland, that was just a regular story. I had friends with similar family histories in college or in high school. But then I left Poland for the Netherlands for my PhD in physics, which in the end I did not get. I quit that PhD program and I'm proud of it. But I left Poland for Western academia. And by that time, I already had some classical liberal friends that told me how the market works. And I thought that, whoa, finally, somebody's talking about economics, somebody's talking about politics, and it makes sense. Because before I really didn't like politics, I really didn't like economics because I thought something is weird here. I thought somebody is lying to me, and I refused to learn any bureaucracy kind of themed civics lessons at school. I just refused to learn it. I didn't like it. But then my friends told me about like the market system and told me about supply and demand and how politicians lie to you. And I already had this intuition in me, so it made sense. So I left Poland almost 10 years ago. I was at the time calling myself a libertarian, but I was not active in any circles. I just had this intuition. I had these views. I was born out of freedom fighters, and I thought that story would be recognized, but then Western academia really disappointed me, and I was basically shocked because I came to like coffee breaks in in a university in the Netherlands, and people would be asking me ridiculous questions like, "Are you grateful to Stalin?" or "Is communism cool?" And I mean, I was completely not expecting that. I was unaware of how universities are basically infected by this old Soviet propaganda. And I started to feel very lonely. So I Googled libertarians in the Netherlands, and I started coming to like meetups in the Netherlands. And then it all escalated. Universities went too crazy for me, to the point of I had this story when I was teaching algebra, and one of my students came in a hammer and sickle t-shirt, and I was not ready for it. So I started to have this stomach ache, and I was just not feeling well. So I asked if I could leave, because to me, this is linked to someone murdering my family. So I left, but then the professors started gossiping about me, and they thought I was intolerant, and they did not understand what it means to me. They thought it was a hippie sign. So I, I, I was thinking, I did not think that a professor could be this ignorant, because I am not asking to regulate whatever a student is wearing, but I'm asking for some mutual respect and understanding. And I'm asking for a professor at a higher institution to understand what it means to a Polish person, because that's some basic context here. And I did not get it. And in the end, I quit my PhD. There were a lot of other factors that played into this decision. It was not just because of one stupid algebra story. And I started going to libertarian conferences, Mises University, Institute of Economic Studies in Europe, and other events, LibertyCon, Austrian Economics Conference, because I just dropped what I was doing in physics and I turned to philosophy, because that's where my passion now is after what I've been through. So yeah.
Oh wow! So this was a university in the Netherlands where you saw this.
Yes, in the Netherlands, but also I was required to go to, again, and it was a conference in geophysics. I was required to go on one that was held in San Francisco 1 month after Donald Trump was elected. So I could witness a member of, the Communist Party of the USA with this red star on his hat, and he was handing out flyers at the conference center. So, and people were taking them and distributing, thinking they are a part of an earth science conference. And also, if I know that in the States you talk about the Trump derangement syndrome, I can tell you in universities in Western Europe, the day that Trump got elected and I had to go supervise an exam, and I'm just entering the room, and the professor tells me, instead of a hello, she tells me, "I think I'm getting religious because the world is going to hell," instead of a hello. So there was this immediate assumption that you would be feeling the same way, that you would have the same views, but also you would have the same emotional reaction. And they just assumed everyone has to have these emotional reactions at the mention of Trump. And if somebody didn't, they would get bullied. And it's not about just saying, I don't know, I support Trump. I don't. Of course I don't. But it's about like having the same, some form of hysteria. Like back in 2016, this is how academia looked like. And it's not just in the States and not just in humanities, in exact sciences as well. I mean, of course, politics wouldn't affect the topics of our research because that's exact science, but it very much affected the culture. And for me, it was also this huge problem with perspective when a professor that does not understand what a hammer and sickle means thinks it's just a hippie sign, and and doesn't understand what it means to a Polish person, or that it's actually the flag of the Soviet Union, but suddenly thinks that the world is going to hell because someone elected Trump that is not even her president. So I thought that it was so childish that academia lost all esteem for me.
Yeah, Is academia in Eastern Europe like that, or is it? I know it's bad in Western Europe and it's bad in America, and San Francisco is probably the most communist place in America. But what's it like in the situation in Eastern Europe?
Yeah, I mean, of course, actually, that conference was at that time. That conference was always held in San Francisco, so I was unlucky there. When you ask about Eastern Europe, that's a little bit of a digression I'm going to make here. Of course, you are using Western and Eastern Europe as in the 20th century sense. So we have the
Yes,
Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc,
yes. I
but
mean
as a
countries that were Warsaw Pact countries. Yes.
Yes, yes. So, I mean, as a Polish person, and you asked me how well do I know Polish history? Of course, I had to learn it. So, if you meet like a newly emigrated Polish person and you say that you are from Eastern Europe, then they could get offended. Why?
Oh,
Because they don't want to be linked with the Warsaw Pact story, of course. And basically, if you think about history of the continent, so you had Europe that was baptized by Rome and used Latin alphabet, and you had Europe that was baptized by Constantinople, and they are using this various forms of the Cyrillic alphabet. So
yes.
Polish people who are, of course, writing in Latin alphabet and who are Catholic, they very much prefer to be, referred to as Central Europe and not Eastern, because there is all these things that are entangled into there. I mean, the story of historically being linked with the western part of Europe using their alphabet and not being Orthodox but being Catholic and linked with Rome. But also there is this desire to let go of the Soviet past and be back in the, so to speak, cool group again, which, I mean, of course, it's not like one group is cooler than the other. I'm just trying to explain the feeling. But you ask about Eastern Europe and academia in Eastern Europe, it's not as bad. Slowly, what happened with the humanities departments in the West, it's slowly, should I say, trickling down into for example, University of Warsaw, where I guess the Department of Sociology is just as woke as any department of sociology, but it's just the bigger cities and it's just humanities. So if I tell my story and people don't know what I was majoring in, they would assume that, oh, you met those crazy communist people out there, so why don't you study like an exact subject? Why don't you study on a polytechnic? And I'm a physicist. That happened in the geosciences department when I was doing my PhD in like physics of the earth. So it's not like I'm in humanities, but it's not as bad on the east side. That's for sure.
That's good to know. Yeah, you talk about the Caton massacre. Is it fair
Mm-hmm.
to say that the Soviets treated the Poland worse than the Germans did in the early part of World War II?
Um, yeah, you can definitely defend this claim. Of course, German atrocities are brought to light. They are discussed. They had the Nuremberg process, and everyone knows about it. And they basically exist in pop culture as the synonym for evil, which is not what happened to the Soviet crimes. And I see, I see some injustice in there. So when you had prisoners of war that were captured during the early days of the World War II, which of course in 1939 there was the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact where Hitler and Stalin joined together to invade Poland from both sides, and Stalin was fighting with alongside Hitler for the first 2 years of World War II. It was, of course, in 1941, Hitler attacked and Stalin changed sides. That's why people in Russia, a lot of people in Russia that are only being told like the propaganda part, they believe that the World War II started in 1941, which of course is not true. So when they partitioned Poland in the early years of the war, and they took prisoners of war, they had Stalin told Hitler, like, bring the higher ranking ones, give them to me. And they put them in camps in Katyn, in Kharkov, and places in the east, and there were 3 camps. And basically Stalin killed them all by a direct order. So they were first testing them to see if they can maybe get them to comply with the Soviet regime or do something for them. But the officers, they were honorable people, they refused, and they were all killed by the shot in the back of their heads. And then they lied about it for a long time. And when the graves were discovered, where the Germans were advancing into the Soviet Union and the graves were discovered 2 years later, they were blamed on the Germans, but everyone knew it was the Soviets. And then even Winston Churchill said that, things happen during war, they are our allies, so we are not going to deal with that now. So there was this big silencing happening right away after the massacre. And speaking of comparison with German crimes, if you take Nuremberg processes, so when at least they tried to give justice to those hurt by Hitler and by the Nazi regime, someone from the Soviet services was there to make sure nobody mentions the Katyn massacre. Because there was just, like, for example, the official Soviet statement was that the Germans did it, but someone made sure nobody spoke of it during the Nuremberg massacre. And they came clean only in 1991 about it. What happened to the prisoners of war taken by Hitler? Some of them survived. It's not like they were all killed. Like, they were taken to internment camps. Some of them, they were in internment camps for years, but they did not all of them suffered this kind of fate. So in that sense, if you compare what they did to the POWs at the time, you would say that Stalin was worse. And he also did it with an agenda, because he had an agenda of using Hitler to destroy Europe before he invades. So already in 1940, he wanted to rule over Poland, and he didn't want to have all these educated people causing trouble. So that was a very intentional killing. Some say that it was revenge after the war of 1920, that Poland won against the Soviet Union and destroyed their plans of invading Europe. And some say that was revenge, but I think it was more than just revenge.
Yes, I've also read that there were also some mass deportations to Siberia, like maybe about 1 million Poles were sent to Siberia, and I know they did that with people in the Baltic countries as well.
Yeah. Yes, so that already happened after 1920, because, well, when after World War I, you have a newly formed Poland with new army, and they are facing another threat coming from the east. The Soviets want to invade Europe, and they won the war. There was this big battle of Warsaw, 15th of August 1920, that basically defeated the Soviet attempt to take over Europe, which, by the way, when I thought of still defending my PhD in the Netherlands, I said I want to defend August 15th because I'm surrounded by commies, but that's a side comment.
Yes.
So but the negotiations of peace treaty, that really betrayed a lot of Polish intelligentsia and Polish landowners that were living on the east. They were killed or they were deported, and that started already after Poland won with the Soviet Union and established the borders. That was the Riga Treaty. And a lot of like good, intelligent families that were living on the east, their legacy was destroyed after this. The same happened with the Baltic countries. And speaking of what happened 20 years later, the Katyn massacre, it's not just Polish people. It's any policeman or teacher or anyone that was a bit more educated living in the East, and also Finnish people, the Finns. And that's why I think that Poland and Finland and the Baltic states, we kind of understand Russia. We know that they are no good because of what they did to us. And there was this whole Polish operation that was just not only aimed at the military or people taken as prisoners of war, but also against the civilians, massive deportations, Russification, and so on. I think still up to now, we have a program of repatriation for the Polish people that are living in Kazakhstan, and like they have Polish ancestry and they can prove that they have been deported. And a lot of people, I know it was a big subject in the 90s, but people are still coming back to Poland from Kazakhstan.
Yeah, that's definitely something they did, and Kazakhstan is a very large area that doesn't really have that many people. So they said, "Oh, we'll send them here." And of course, Russia has a lot of places where really nobody wants to live, which is why they have so much land. But didn't Poland have a few skirmishes with some of the other countries after the independence? Though, I mean, they took Vilnius from Lithuania for a while, and the Lithuanians got it back after World War II. And I know there was even a slight. I think there was even a war with the temporarily independent Ukraine at the time. Is that right? Or
oh, yes, when it comes to Vilnius, that was basically what Piłsudski was doing. That was not being coordinated by the government at the time, but that was some kind of freelance action by Piłsudski, who wanted to make Vilnius Polish after the whole history of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And that military operation actually worked at the time. Vilnius was Polish for a while, but even now, I mean, and I don't want to sound like any kind of Polish nationalist. Of course, Vilnius is the capital of Lithuania, but even now there's like a big proportion of Polish people living there. In some places around Vilnius, it's up to 70%. So it's a very convoluted history. Even if we talk about the Commonwealth, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, what was described as Great Lithuania throughout history is actually nowadays Belarus. And what we have, the country of Lithuania is what was called, and I know the Polish pronunciation, Żmudź, and they were the Lithuanian pagans that, okay, of course, in the end, they were baptized and Christianized, but they were a separate ethnicity to the Great Lithuania. So the names changed, and the capitals changed, of course. When it comes to Ukraine, well, what I know, so I'm not going. I'm not going to be detailed on that subject because I don't know the details. I know that in the mid-war period, Lviv, our westernmost big city in Ukraine, that was Polish for a long time, and in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was the capital city of Galicia. So if, like my family, you were living in a town east of Krakow or Krakow, in the 19th century, Lviv would be your capital. And it would be like a huge honor to be like working in Lviv. And in the mid-war period, there was this great university there and a whole school of mathematics that was famous, was working from Lviv. So it's a very important cultural center. So I think Lviv was 50-50 when it comes to Polish and Ukrainians, and sometimes they had some fallouts and fights. And also there was a huge Jewish population, because the whole Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, even before the 19th century, the partitions, and before the 20th century, it had a big proportion of Jews. Because in the 16th century, they were very tolerant when it comes to religion. And Jews that were persecuted in other parts of Europe could come to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and live there. So that's why especially on the eastern side, there were a lot of Jews. And I think the Ukrainian part of Poland from the mid-war period, it was a mix between Poles and Ukrainians and Jews. It was mostly this mix.
Yeah. I lost your sound there for a while. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm there. I hear you.
Okay. Okay, sorry. Yeah, anyway, you talked about the Caton massacre. Did you have did any family members talk about hiding out Jews in Poland? Because there's certainly a lot of heroic stories coming out of Poland. I mean, Irina Sendler being at the top, but there were certainly plenty of others.
So when it comes to my family, all I know is that my grandma will be talking about how they were forced to leave where they were living, and but I don't know any personal stories from my family when it comes to that. My boyfriend's grandmother was linked with Warsaw, so she was, at the time, she was a little girl, but she was in the city during the uprising. And but I don't know I don't have any personal stories of that kind.
So Galicia was part of Poland, but it's part of Ukraine now. In fact, a large portion of Ukraine used to be in Poland before World War II.
Yes, well, Galicia was actually a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Yeah.
So when you say Galicia, that was like the northernmost part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the 19th century. And a big portion of Galicia is in Poland, another big portion of Galicia is in Ukraine. But also, of course, Europe is ever changing when it comes to the borders. Like, I think you can watch some animations online, and a big portion of Ukraine was actually in Poland in the mid-war period. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So is basically everybody who speaks Polish living in Poland now, or are there still Polish people elsewhere, and you have pockets of other and are there any real significant minorities living in Poland now?
So basically what World War II did to Europe was when they were deciding on the New World Order in 1945, they were going for national states. Yeah. So they shifted Poland so that it was more to the west, as it was in the very early medieval periods, and so they forced all the Germans that were living in today's Western Poland, they forced them to move to the west. They forced all the Polish people that were living on nowadays Ukraine to move to the west, and they established these new borders. So they were forcibly going to establish national states. So now Poland is predominantly Polish-speaking, predominantly Catholic. There is really not that much diversity there. It's all like in the 90s when it comes to percentage. However, we do have at least two distinguished secession movements, and that is Silesia, which I have a friend who says that he is Silesian, who speaks Silesian. It's a region in southern Poland, a little bit more to the west, when we have coal mines, and they have their own traditions, their own flag, and their own language. And there's also, and again, I have a friend who calls himself Kashubian, and there is the Kashubian minority on the seaside in the north, which again, they have their own flag and language. And both Silesian and Kashubian sound a little bit like Polish, a little bit like German, a little bit like something of their own. So those are like these two minorities that have their own secession movements. And apart from that, everything is in the 90s when it comes to percentage, because of how they re-established Europe after World War II.
Wow, that's interesting. I did not realize there were secession movements in Poland. As far as academia, do you think what did Poland do after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of communism? How did Poland transform itself into a freer country?
So I know so many people that would be great speakers on the subject that actually work for the professor that allowed us to have a pretty good transition to something that could be called, or at least in the 90s would be called, a form of market economy. And judging by the progress that Poland has made in my lifetime, which is 30 years plus, not a big plus, but that was a big success. So we started from this. So everything in the Eastern Bloc started from the same level. The Soviet Empire got bankrupt. We had a period of gang wars. I mean, the gang wars, they were way more pronounced in Russia because the regions that were just Soviet satellite states, like Poland or the Czech Republic, I think the Czech Republic had the most successful transition, and the Baltic states too. But I would say that the success of their transition is also linked with the fact that they are smaller states. And like we know, the smaller, the better when it comes to government systems. But at least the satellite states, they still had some kind of elites that remembered what it's like to have some form of the rule of law, some form of let's say normal institutions, not institutions run by a dictator or run by fear. And because they still remembered how to create such institutions, the transition was easier, well, far easier than when it comes to former Soviet republics. And also another factor that comes into play is that in Poland, in the Czech Republic, people knew that the regime is foreign and it is imposed on them by some kind of external enemy. So there was no feeling that this is our way of living, or this is who we are now supposed to be, this is our new ideology. No, there was always this struggle that was external. He's like, you are attacking my identity, I am going to be resistant. So that's why it was easier for them to create independent states after the fall of Moscow in 1989, and then in 1989 the fall of the Berlin Wall and the final bankruptcy. I mean, it was a temporary bankruptcy, sadly, but it still allowed some states to break free in 1991. So it was easier to break away when you knew it was external struggle. But for the former Soviet republics, it was not the case, and that the system was tried to ingrain them, like was ingrained in them in a way as part of identity. So they kind of fell into this black hole. Like everything went bankrupt. What am I supposed to do now? I only know how to pick cotton because Moscow imposed that all of the Kazakhstan or all of the other states in Central Asia, means Moscow told us to only pick cotton, and I have no faith. I only have communism. I don't know what to do other than pick cotton, and it went bankrupt. And all the educated people, all the teachers and doctors, they are Russian, and they are now running away to Russia because of the ethnic tensions. So that's why, for example, states in Central Asia, they had a really rough transition, and they still recover from it, and they still think it was a catastrophe because in their perspective it was. They knew that everything else was taken away from them, and then the only thing that they had went bankrupt, so they were left with nothing. It's not the case, of course, in Europe. It's not like people had no faith. People were Christian. People were actively working against the regime. They had identities outside of the regime. They remembered what it's like to run a state with some form of rule of law, and they, in a way, they kept the memory of who they are. So it was easier to transition. And of course, Professor Balcerowicz, Leszek Balcerowicz, is our regional Polish hero. He's a very much classical liberal professor, but he managed to get to give us the market reforms in the early 90s, in the mid 90s, in the imperfect reality of people linked with various services in various states and various regimes, when they were fighting, when they were still people from the previous regime that wanted to stay in power, and you had all these games that you normally have in politics. Professor Balcerowicz still managed to give us the market reforms that Poland needed, and they were successful enough, and like Poland started flourishing, and like we started from level 0. We were poorer than Ukraine was at the time, and we really managed to get ourselves into European structures by the time of 2004. That was a great success. And if you ask anyone from at the center of, for example, from the Foundation of Economic Freedom or other places, other think tanks in Poland, I can ask, they will tell you the full story of how Professor Balcerowicz helped us with the market reforms, and how Poland made progress, and is this beautiful country you can visit as a tourist and feel like at home, right?
How significant do you think Pope John Paul II was in the fight against communism?
Wow, if you come to my hometown, the airport is named after John Paul II. We have a statue of John Paul II on every corner. Some of them are very not in good proportion, because every single sculptor, tries to make a John Paul II sculpture. So Pope John Paul II is such a huge persona and charismatic. He was such a charismatic leader, and now he is such a celebrity that sometimes there is even this. He's so big that some people are starting to even make fun of it as a retaliation, because he's such a huge figure. And yes, he was. If you even go back to the 70s or go back to the 80s, and you look at the reactions of the regime when he became pope, it was like a wake-up call to the nation, saying that you are not abandoned, you are not alone, and and there are so many people that feel the same way as you do, that want to be free, that want to practice their religion, that want to practice who they are, and that do not are not going to be obedient to what the overlords in Moscow said. So thanks to John Paul II being chosen Pope, when he arrived with a visit, there were millions of people on the streets and millions of people on the squares, and then they realized their power, because it's always like when you are alone, you are fighting a fight and you are alone, then you think you are not going to succeed, you're just giving up, or maybe you are too afraid to speak up because you think you are alone. And at that time, it was this huge blast. It's like this huge, that, hey, wake up. There's millions of you. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to hide away. And there's like so many other people that think that way. So when John Paul II came, you could see in the eyes of Jaruzelski, and there's even I think there's a good video on that. You could see that they were afraid, like the regime. They were really afraid and of what he can do to people, and they didn't know how to act. And Jaruzelski was trembling when he was talking to him. So I think that's the primary role of John Paul II, is to really showing the movement that it's just the majority and that they can get together and they can win. So I think like even looking at all those crowds, that was what started it.
Yeah. Do you think how much was Lech Walesa, sympathetic to free markets, or was he just anti-communist, but not necessarily free market?
It's really a tricky question. It's a tricky question. I think in the early 90s, there was a running joke that a cow would be chosen for the government if a cow had like a campaign with Lech Wałęsa, and there was like a picture of a cow with Lech Wałęsa. So everyone in the early 90s, they were only two voting lists, so they were only two so-called parties you could vote for, and you could either vote for the Communist Party or for the Solidarity movement. So everybody was voting for the Solidarity movement to break away. So that was that breaking away thing. However, Lech Wałęsa, he was an electric that was chosen to represent the Solidarity movement, and I don't feel very confident talking about how sympathetic he was to free markets. I know that basically he may be some kind of narcissistic person that was chosen and used to be a face of the movement, but also was probably manipulated by the people that were in power at the time to try to create a structure where they can still stay in power. If how can I talk about this? Well, in the 80s, when the communist authorities realized that they are going to lose, they are outnumbered, and there is no way of moving away from it. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to probably steal as much as they can and still stay in power as long as they can. So they started to create all forms of ploys to try to stay in power. And I suppose that, after Lech Wałęsa was after the Solidarity movement won the election, they really opposed the proposition of trying to, have this movement of, hey, show me your files. Were you in the Communist Party, or were you an informant for the communist regime? Somebody wanted to really make it all clear to show me your cards, and if you're linked with the regime, you should go. And they really blocked that movement. There were some power plays going around. This movement was blocked. And in the end, we ended up really worse off than the Czech Republic, where Václav Havel actually got rid of the former Communist Party members and former Communist informants. Václav Havel got rid of them. They were yeeted out of social life, and this did not happen in Poland. And in the end, right now, Czech Republic has like much better law than Poland, and is doing better. So that was that. So Lech Wałęsa was not matched to Václav Havel with this in this regard at all. And also, if we think about the what happened in Gdańsk when he started, so the postulates that the Solidarity movement actually glued to the door, if you read through them, they are very socialist. So when it comes to free market, there is no free market there. They just wanted for their people to be in power. They didn't want the regime. They wanted what they called socialism with human face, so that you don't beat us up on the street, you don't shoot us, you don't restrict our freedom of speech, but we still want all that benefits. So at least like in the economic section, this socialist propaganda really did the job. So it's not like it was a free market movement, it was an anti-communist movement in the particular context of the 80s Poland.
Yeah, so Poland was when I was in Warsaw for a couple days after the conference, it seemed like it was great. I really saw it. It seemed like it progressed very well. It seemed like the rest of Western Europe. But how was Poland in 2020 when the big bad virus came around and the mass hysteria associated with it?
Well, so in 2020, I remember the initial panic because, initially there was always a panic and people were staying at home. And there was, even in my neighborhood, there was like a police car with these loudspeakers saying like, you should stay at home. And my mom was just so angry and sad and traumatized. She said it's like the martial arts law, like the martial art. It's like the martial law in 1980. And she had some bad memories when the police car was driving around neighborhood with a loudspeaker. But that was March 2020. And what I did is I took a train to the Baltic Sea, and then I took a ferry, and then I lived in Sweden for 2 months. So I was a free person. And at first there was no really mask mandates, or no, of course there was no vaccine yet, but people were panicking and they stayed home. And then I think it got pretty bad to some extent, but people completely stopped paying attention to the virus this year because we have other issues. So
Yes. I've cynically said that if Putin had invaded Ukraine exactly 2 years earlier, we never would have experienced any of this corona stuff.
You may be right. Yes. So
medical
Nobel for ending a pandemic, right?
Yes. And how many Ukrainians are living in Poland right now? I know
I think
Jacek is even taking some
like
in.
maybe 2 or 3 million. It's like the range is in millions.
Yeah.
And we have a program. So we have a program if you're Ukrainian and you cross it's like a few months after you cross the border. I think there's an exact number of days. I don't know if it's 120. Then the Polish family that is hosting you gets 40 zlotys, which is around a few dollars a day, so that they can host you for free. And that's the time for you to find accommodation, to find a job. So a lot of people, starting February and March, a lot of people took Ukrainians to their houses. So there's like this big helping group on Facebook, and people are offering rooms in their houses or rooms in their hotels for free for Ukrainian families, mothers with children. And it's easy for them to learn the language. So it's actually easy for them to accommodate because the languages are very similar. So it just takes a month or two to be functional. And we can understand each other. If we really put our heads together, we can understand each other. So that's a plus. And I was teaching in a public school briefly for this spring. And in each class, especially in like the first and second class of high school, which would be 9th grade and 10th grade, we had up to 5 or 6 new Ukrainian students that came after February. And sometimes they were not attending school because they had Polish lessons organized. So they had like a whole program to learn the language so that the next year they can attend the school as regular students. So we as teachers were not supposed to pass them to the next grade because they had the Polish learning program, but they were welcome at our classes. And I mean, I was teaching physics, so it was easy for me. I could just like write a formula and then talk to the student if he was not fluent in Polish. But we had a lot of students. And also Ukrainian students that were living in Poland before, they were really helping them out. They were helping them accommodate. We had big refugee centers in every bigger train station or bus station where you could get information, a warm meal, a package with a plush toy, and all other stuff. It was quite it was arranged really in no time. So I think right now it's up to 2 or 3 million, and I still see the posts of people looking for accommodation, but now a lot of them are willing to pay. At this point, Ukrainians living in Poland, when they are looking for a flat, they say, I can pay rent because I already found a job. So they are really accommodating quickly.
You think they'll stick around after the war's over, or do you think they might go back to Ukraine?
Some of them will, and some of them will go back. And I think at this point, a lot of people are going back to Western Ukraine, which good for them. They can really do that. And a lot of people, they are just missing their homes and they are going back. I remember I was actually taking a bus to Libertarian in Prague, which was in April, I believe, yeah. And the other bus that was going from the Krakow station was going to Odessa, and it was filled with people. Also, if I took a train that was going to the border I was getting off earlier, it was also full of people that were going back to their homes. So some of them will stick, that's for sure, but they are already returning.
We'll see what happens. Is Ukraine pretty? Are there different? Maybe you don't know, but are there different factions in Ukraine, or are they all pretty? Because Ukraine is twice the land area Poland is, or
yes,
is it pretty much?
Well, Ukraine is really a large country. So sometimes because my long-term boyfriend is in a humanitarian convoy, so I really monitor what's happening in Ukraine all the time. Because, like for example, this July, he went as far as Bakhmut to the front line, and he was delivering goods. So he's delivering water and food. He's transporting people and pets. There was a time when he transported 14 cats to the Ukrainian-Polish border. So he's doing a lot, and he's all over Ukraine, and I closely monitor. There is this app, lifemap.com, and I can see what happens. That's pretty much linked to the media. So you can see like the time frame of what hit where. And when I look at the map, and then I see like that's the distance between Vienna and Krakow, and then you take the distance between Vienna and Krakow, and you are like in Lviv, in Western Ukraine, and then you still need like 2 or 3 distances like that to get to the front line. It is really a huge country. So it's the 3rd largest country in Europe, which is we don't appreciate that. Like we always underestimate that size. Is Ukraine divided? I think I know awesome Ukrainian ladies that are working with us, also with Liberty International, that are going to be on our panel that we will have soon. We will have a podcast soon with our friend Jacek. Of course, you know Jacek. So I think Natalia would be would answer this question better than I would, because from the outside you would guess that President Zelensky would actually really unify Ukraine. Like you have like an enemy at the gates, then you get unified. That's what you would think. But the real picture is more convoluted than that. And my Ukrainian friends would say that it is in a more nuanced way. It actually is politically divided. Of course, it's not divided whether to fight Russia or not. I mean, they are fighting for their freedom, but politically it is divided, and I would ask a Ukrainian to give more details.
Yeah. Are the Polish people, are they at least ready if something happens?
Ready if something happens?
Well, if an invasion or something like that. I mean,
I think we got very ready in 1999.
Yeah. Oh, 1999.
So 1999 is when Poland joined NATO. And basically, it now gives us the sense of security that we really wouldn't have. And it really solidifies that Poland now is a part of Western Europe. I mean, okay, it's Central Europe, right? But it really solidifies our like geopolitical alliance. And I know there was, of course, like some people saying Poland could do independent geopolitics, but there is no way Poland could do independent geopolitics. And in our situation, in our geographics, like with our geography, with our history, with our position in the 90s, the only direction was west at that point. And that's also true for Ukraine. But the problem is that Ukraine, as a former Soviet republic, in the 90s, they still had like Soviet people running the country and making the decisions. So the Treaty of 1994, like the Budapest files, or that was not, Ukraine was not making a sovereign decision at this point, and just some Soviet dignitaries signed the treaty that they will transport the nuclear weapons to Moscow and leave Ukraine with the assertion that they are not going to attack them. Well, you don't trust Moscow. That's the point. And again, like, because what was I saying? Like, is Poland ready for an invasion? When we joined NATO, so that was in our position, that was the best political solution. And Ukraine, when it comes to Ukraine wanting to be associated with the West and looking westwards in geopolitics, they are facing similar alternatives and similar opportunity costs, and just they are in a similar position as Poland was in the 90s. They want to be free in the sense that they want to be relatively freer than what they are leaving behind. Because, like, you are in Texas, and I know people in the States would say that, of course, the state is bad. It takes away your freedom. But we are talking in relatives, because we are talking about real life. And Ukrainians in such a position that people want to be relatively freer. They look to the West, even though the West is really a shade of what it was. It really has this, the freedom in the West is really deteriorating. It doesn't matter. It's still relatively something better.
Yeah, I don't understand what it is, and it seems to be a universal problem that the college professors in every Western country have declared war on Western civilization. And
yes.
I know it's a problem in South America as well. I mean, which I do consider Western, because they're all, descendants of, Spanish
Yes.
colonies. I don't know how we can solve that problem, and unless people learn the hard way. But do you think it's necessary for a country to be very Christian to stay free, or do you think? I mean, Poland is still very Catholic, it sounds like, or do you think it can become more secular and still be free?
That's a lot of interesting questions in one. So, historically speaking, Christianity gave you that backbone against oppression. I know, if I will never be invited to an objectivist conference after I said that. We have this conversation is called Forum Fountainhead, and we are talking about how Christianity is good for freedom, right? But it can be. If you think about even the roots of Christianity in the medieval period, you would have and what Thomas Aquinas was saying, like, he was the one of the first naturalists. So he will be saying that even the king is no except to the law. Like, the king has to obey God's law.
Yes.
And you would have people that were not really linked with any government, and not but linked with the church. And the church was doing all the charity work. So these parts of Christian arrangements were really good for freedom. But what else is good for freedom? If you are close, well, we are talking about Moscow, obviously. If you are close to Moscow, imagine people are selfish. We all know that. They act after their own self-interest. So imagine the KGB knocks on your door and they say, well, give us information or we will torture you, or you are going to live in fear and you will end up being obedient anyway. So if they turn up that fear and torture to a certain degree, everyone would cave. Why wouldn't a Christian person cave? So if you truly believe in Jesus and the KGB knocks on your door and they say, give us that information or we will torture you, and you say, you know what? But if I give you this information, then I will nullify my arrangement with Jesus, and Jesus is giving me something better to do. So you're not going to corrupt me. And you see, this person is still acting in their interests.
Yes.
So that's one example how Christianity could be good for freedom. And you are act in your self-interest, but Jesus gives you such a huge deal that you are impossible to get corrupted by anything else if you truly believe that. And
yes.
That's why in the 40s and like in early Soviet Union, when they had this reign of terror, the NKVD, which is what became KGB, when they saw somebody wearing a cross or being Christian, they just backed off. So that's one example. And also in days of oppression, religion like that gives you something bigger so that you are not living in fear. And we all know that a slave is made out of fear. So that is a very powerful structure that can help you fight the oppressor. So that's how Christianity is good. Is that the only possible arrangement in which you can be free? Can you be secular and free? Then you would have to have really strong secular ethics, which is possible, but historically, it still did evolve from Christianity. I mean, and this is just history. I'm not saying it's the only way secular ethics can evolve. I'm pretty sure there are many ways, but in our part of the world, it evolved from Christianity. But you would have to have a strong backbone, really, when real oppression comes. And speaking about, do we have to learn the hard way? Sometimes I think that people, if you can afford not to learn the hard way, you're not going to learn the hard way. And at this point, only universities are infected with this kind of propaganda, but they are at least not running the world. They are not running politics yet. And it could be scary if they start to run politics, but at least I think in the Anglo-Saxon world, in England, in the States, where you have some form of culture of freedom and self-reliance and the rule of law, that is maybe it's not so visible in politics right now, but it is visible in culture. And there's someone from this crazy, like Cambridge University or Harvard or San Francisco, whatever, that gets in power, and people we're not going to take them seriously at some point. Maybe, at least in the States and in England, what happens in academia, it is a bubble that is very detached from reality, very detached from what a real person wants or needs, and it's just talking about some abstract ideas completely removed from any world history or economics or reality. But if they try to implement it, they will just receive, like, people are not going to allow them to do that, because I think those crazy academics, they don't understand people. And you could see that, like, in 2016 when Trump won, it's like more than 50% voted for him, and people in universities, in like even like the Zurich Polytechnic where I was at the time, which is supposed to be the second best polytechnic in the world, and polytechnic, people thought that, all those crazy Americans are just bad and racist. They did not understand them. They did not take a realistic approach.
Yes.
I'm not sure about Latin America, because Latin America has more shaky foundations.
Yes, it
And
does.
you could see that in Chile, because the free market economy in Chile was imposed by a regime. So it did not grow in the hearts of people, and they were against oppression. So now they are not so strongly pro free market. It is like Latin America is more shaky, but I still hope that at least the Western world is not going to go as crazy as their universities.
Yeah. One thing, maybe not connected to religion, but how uh, America seems to be more of a divorce culture than a marriage culture. What's it like in Poland right now? I mean, what percentage
Mm.
of people get married and stay married in Poland?
Well,
And have
I don't have the statistics on me. It's not 50%.
yeah,
Uh, it could be around 30. It's not 50. That's for sure. But Poland is also a way less diverse country. And
yes,
one thing that people are outside of the US, when they are talking about the US, they say about gun laws in the states or divorce rates in the states. They forget that it's 50 separate states.
yes, yes. They're still very 50. I mean, for example, I always notice in Europe there's a Polish license plate, there's an Austrian license plate, there's a German license plate. There's no American license plate. You have 50 different license plates in the USA.
Hmm.
It's that way in Canada and Mexico as well, by the way. So, the provincial license plates and state license plates. But yeah,
Yes.
it's definitely not as unified. Although, uh,
And also in the states, like, you have to really look at communities, like separate communities. uh, the Asian American community within a city, or the African American suburbs, and all these different cultures, and they have different, as far as I understand, they have, well, also different income, different ways of living, and religions too. It's not the case in Poland. So
yeah,
now I have the general divorce rate in Poland, 33%.
okay, yeah, yeah. Also, granted, while I do consider myself an objectivist, I always have great conversations with religious libertarians, and I do wonder if you mentioned Aquinas. Aquinas is much more Aristotelian, where say Augustine or Luther would be more Platonist. Do you think you need to have an Aristotelian society to be free as opposed to a Platonist one?
Um, well, I had my talk on dialectics last year in Austria, and I actually had a slide where I had Aristotle and Aquinas and Ayn Rand and John Paul II in
Yeah,
like one slide, or Ayn Rand and John Paul II in one slide. Basically, do I prefer? Do we need to have Aristotelian society for freedom? We need society that values truth for freedom.
yeah,
How do you value truth? Well, basically, you have to mutually agree that truth exists. And when you interact, when you discuss ideas, you interact to discover the truth. So you can say that, okay, I don't know the truth. Like, maybe no, there is no human being that knows the truth, but truth exists and is objective. This is what we need for a free society. Because the moment somebody claims that everybody has their truth, or everybody is right, or truth is subjective, somebody is going to hijack it for their needs. Somebody is going to hijack it and say, oh, I'm not going to even listen to you because you have your truth and I have mine. And when that happens, that's like a prerequisite for a totalitarian state. Because in a totalitarian state, you would say, hey, Mr. Militiaman, like, don't beat me up. That is against like the law and humanity and everything. And they would say, well, you have your truth, I have mine. And by the way, I have like the bat and you don't. So we need to have the flow of information. We need to have the flow of ideas. We need to be able to challenge ideas in search for truth. So we all have to agree that some kind of truth exists and it's external to us. This is what we need. And if that's Aristotelian, then yes.
Yeah, I'd say it is. I know at least in America nowadays, people want to decide, well, you were born with a penis, but you don't have to be a man. It's like, okay, that's seems rather absurd. I don't know if we're seeing that kind of thing in Europe yet, but.
Well, actually, I mean, if you say that, I mean, so if I think there is brain research that it's actually possible to have that mismatch between the brain and your body. But even when you have this mismatch, it's like sex really matters because you feel terrible, right? So
yeah.
So it's not just like using it willy-nilly. It's like if somebody goes through all that pain, it means that they were in pain. So that it means that it really matters.
Yes, I definitely think there can be mismatches between the brain and body, and this is all an area of science that we're still just very unexplored.
But it's also very dangerous to use it politically or to get this kind of hysteria, because it's like a teenager is it's easy to experience any kind of distress or dysphoria when you are a teenager, and if adults are being hysteric about it, they can hurt you.
Oh yes, yeah. It's definitely something. It's definitely an interesting issue there. Yeah. So, what do you think's in store for Poland's future? Do you think it's going to become more free or become better? I mean, I know it's still not perfect, but I think it's certainly come a long way in the last 30 years.
Yes, it does, but the ruling party now is bad. I hope they lose the next election. Basically, the business now is bad. The energy market is also bad. I'm going to be living in a wooden house and I have a stove, so at least I'm going to use wood chips. But it's hard to say. The inflation is skyrocketing. I mean, it's not hyperinflation, of course, but actually, US dollar, it used to be 3.7 in zlotys, like 3.7 zlotys for a dollar. Now it's a 5.
Yes.
So dollar is getting stronger. So if I don't think it's possible to have your savings in zlotys, like go to gold, go to dollars, don't save in zlotys if that's even possible. The public education system is bad everywhere, but teachers in Poland are criminally underpaid. And now I have a lot of students on my freelance tutoring sessions, actually. So, and I see how they are hurting kids. But I think it's like this everywhere. So that's the negatives. The negatives are similar, like everywhere in Europe, only some areas are more pronounced, of course. Some areas are more specific. It's hard to say what's in store. I don't think we are going to slide into any sort of regime. It's in the structures that we have. Hopefully, it's not as easy. Hopefully, it's not as possible. And also, I'm in Polish Libertarian Association, and recently we conducted a study how many people that are inclined to like the free market are in the Libertarian Association, not in this association, of course, but are in Poland. So there was like a detailed study of where your intuitions lie. And actually it turned out that there is a market for a classical liberal party in Poland. I think so. So my friends are going to publish the results soon, but it could be around 30% that actually there are people who value freedom in Poland. It's just that up to now, and they did not have a clear political party they could vote for. So there was there were some classical liberal projects, but they made some really bad coalitions and they started to really turn out right. And people stopped, taking them seriously, which is a shame. So, and there is no way that this party can have like a successful coalition. So there really is a market for a classical liberal party in Poland. I don't know, like if the CIA is watching, then you can try to install.
Yes. Since you brought up inflation up, is Poland taken to Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies? Or do you know any Bitcoiners in Poland?
I do, because I'm in a Libertarian association.
Yeah.
But it's still more of like a novelty. It's still more niche than anything else. Because when I was in Austria, I could see kiosks where you could pay in Bitcoin and you could have like Bitcoin mat, but not so much in Poland. It's not really something that, oh, by the way, you can pay in Bitcoin. Yeah, sure. And no, it's not one of the like regular means of payment. There is a company, Flying Item, that are doing Bitcoin mats, and they are prospering on the market. So I suppose there is a market for it, but it's not mainstream.
Yeah, it's still somewhat of a niche here too. I hear different things around the world, but certainly it's a and I've said quite a few times I think the cryptocurrency that takes over the world may not have even have been invented yet, but they're certainly working on things. Do you think the EU is a friend of liberty or an enemy of liberty? Because it seems like you sometimes get these top-down regulations from the EU that you can't really get rid of. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Poland hasn't adopted the euro yet, so but what do you?
It is actually a convoluted issue, and if you ask some economist libertarians, they would say that EU was a really good project like 30 years ago. It was, of course, a very good project when it was, but right now some parts of the EU regulations are evolving in a ridiculous direction. For example, you could have I think 30 pages or even more pages of regulations on how to transport tomatoes or how to transport snails. But with this sort of regulations, people usually find a way to go around them. So I think that's a funny example. Maybe talk about something later. In southern Poland, in the mountains, there is a famous sheep cheese thing that is specific to the region, and it was registered as one of the national treasures by the European Commission. But because it got registered as this special product unique to the region, in order for you to produce that, you would have to pass all the EU regulations. And you are a shepherd in the mountains and you just do your sheep cheese. Who cares about EU regulations? So they started to name the cheese a different name, and it was that easy. So but that was just one example. I think when it comes to the EU, it really depends on the state, because there are some states that would be more freedom oriented if it wasn't for the EU. They would have some parts of their markets would be more liberalized, and there are some states that are less freedom oriented, and in order to comply with like the EU standards, they have to act differently. So there are different incentives in different places, and it's really hard to separate all the components that go into it and say if it has a net negative or a net positive effect. When I think that started into 2004, it does have a net positive effect. People are saying that Poland in the 90s was really rapidly growing, and it stopped growing in the 2000s when we joined the EU. But we are forgetting what we were looking at, because we don't know the rate of progress Poland would have without joining the EU. So it could be that the growth would be really way more dampened without the EU, because after the 90s, the new power was more set into stone, and more regulations started anyway. So it is very hard to say. Like, I know if you ask an economist, they would say that 30 years ago it was good. Now it's getting weird and ridiculous and far more overregulated with these top-down regulations. But relatively speaking, it is still not as bad.
That's good. So, I don't know what it sounds like you've been to a lot of libertarian events. What do you, you've probably noticed with the wonderful exception of the conference in Georgia, we've definitely seen more males than females. What can we do to bring more females into the liberty movement?
So actually, Justina, you remember Justina in Georgia? Before Georgia, the Polish Foundation that is also run by Jacek, we had an event in Silesia in Poland, and Justina had a talk about why women do not choose libertarianism and what we can do about it. I think what they started doing. So what Liberty International and also what the Freedom and Entrepreneurship Foundation, what they started doing is show more women at that events. So in Silesia, that was the first conference where we had 5 invited talks by women. And I was there, I was talking about market environmentalism. So if women see that there is this representation, they are more inclined to choose it, because at least in Poland and probably in the States too, to some extent, and in other places, libertarianism was kind of could be linked in your head with this boy in a three-parted suit that is talking about philosophy, and that is just not someone that could attract a lot of diverse people to the movement. But if you showcase, women that are talking about libertarianism and doing it right, it can create an incentive for, like, it can show, hey, you have your place there. But I think it's starting right now, like it's just starting. And in Georgia, I have a sticker on my laptop. We started this, I mean, we didn't start it. In Silesia, we had a lady from Nigeria that started a chapter in Nigeria. There is an organization called Lola, and it's Ladies of Liberty Alliance. And so we have these Lola chapters for liberty-oriented women. So we are trying to grow, but it's true, libertarianism started as this association of boys in three-parted suits.
Yes. And and a lot of the men, they're smart, they're good men, they're principled, but just some of them are they're really boring. So, I mean but they're great people. But yes, so okay, well, I feel like it's a good time to call the end of this. We've had a great talk. I've certainly enjoyed it. You've certainly been a great ambassador for Poland, and I knew you'd be a great talk on here.
Thank
you. It went longer than I expected, and but yeah. So, is there anything else you want to say before we say goodbye?
One thing, true libertarians really care about friends, and I think that it's important to travel, to have friends all over the world, to talk to them and learn from them, on an even foot, and care if your friends are fighting for freedom, leave the country, grow and learn, and always look for the context.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. It's been very enlightening. I'll certainly think of some other good people to have out there. So, well, have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.